Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes, and today I'm joined by Snehal Antani. Snehal, thanks for being here.
Awesome, Chris. Great to see you.
Yeah, I was telling you off air, man. I've been following your journey, following you in the company for quite a while, but I'm excited to chat with you. For folks unlike me who haven't been following you and the team already for several years, can you tell us a bit about your background as well as the team at Horizon 3 AI?
Yeah, sure. So my background, I'm a software engineer by trade and education. Did my undergrad at Purdue. Started my career at IBM as a developer, and then worked my way up through product management, through like field engineering, and then eventually became a CIO at GE Capital, where I was using a lot of the enterprise software that I had built as a developer, which is a really fun experience. So being able to be on the building code side and then the using products side, and then went back to the building products side of the house by going to Splunk. So I moved out to the Bay Area to be the CTO at Splunk and helped do some interesting things there. And then in 2017, decided to take a break from industry and leave to serve as the first CTO within U.S. Special Operations. An amazing experience. My military experience or background was watching Jack Ryan and Tropic Thunder. Like I didn't come from a military background, and to leave industry and to get immersed in a world filled with some of the best leaders you could possibly imagine. I got to do some amazing things with them and whatnot. I'll tell some stories there. But that's where I met my co-founder, Tony. And when he retired from the Air Force and I finished my time within Special Operations, we started Horizon 3 together. And the problem to solve is we have no idea we're secure until the bad guys show up. So why wait for a breach or a consultant to show up once a year? How do I continuously verify my security posture? By hacking myself as often as possible. And that really was the premise of, could we build an autonomous penetration testing system that could outperform humans, especially infrastructure testing at scale?
Yeah, it's you had some time in the federal sector, so I was going to make a joke about ATOs and compliance and security, but I'll leave that for later in the conversation. But if I could ask, a little bit, you talked about going in and being the first CTO at the command there. What made you make that jump, from commercial industry? Because many like that are on that side of things, they look at the government and they don't want to go there. They think about it in terms of its legacy, it's bureaucratic, it's cumbersome and you can't do much and it's like not innovative. And you hear a lot of those things sometimes from people in the commercial side. How was that experience and what made you go ahead and take that leap? And coming out of it, it sounds like you're better for it.
Yeah. Oh, so one, I'll start with the end result and then talk about kind of the journey there. I grew more personally and professionally during my time within Special Operations than in anything I'd ever done in my career. My first day on the job, I was pulled into the one of the offices of one of our assistant commanding generals, a SEAL, and he sits me down, and two other SEALs come in, sit next to me, and he made clear that what you did yesterday won't keep you here tomorrow. You earned the right to be on this team every single day. And there's this interesting mindset of you demand excellence of yourself, you demand excellence of your people. I think the second big cultural lesson for me was the power of always being the most prepared person in the room or striving to be. Not so that you know everything that's going on, but so you can ask the best questions. And I learned, I saw this firsthand with the JSOC commander, who very quietly prided himself on being able to ask incredibly precise questions that drove significant change in results across the organization. And he could only do so because he was often the most prepared person in the room. I think the third big cultural lesson I learned in Special Operations was bias towards those closest to the problem. And so within JSOC, it's a key the mic culture. Unlike conventional military service, at least from what I've been told, where it's very top down, like you're told from the top what to do. Within Special Operations, it's all about those closest to the problem or the ones that you have a bias towards. And your job is to empower and enable them to get the job done and allow them to key the mic. Whether it's good news or bad news, key the mic as early as possible to preserve decision space to make sure that the mission is successful. So that's kind of the end, probably three big lessons I learned and how I grew personally. But for me to get there, there was two feelings of helplessness in my life. The first feeling was me as a senior in college when 9/11 happened. And I remember in the months afterwards, this feeling of helplessness of how could I be a force multiplier to solving that problem? And it wasn't just about enlisting where I felt that was a 1-to-1 impact, but rather there had to be a way for me to have a 10-to-1, 100-to-1 impact using the technology skills I had built out. And there was no obvious path for me at that time. And then, I kind of sat on those feelings and suppressed those feelings. And then I remember those feelings re-emerging in 2016 when you're reading about the Yazidi atrocity. And it's like, man, that feeling of helplessness, the feeling that you want to go off and do something. So from 2016 on, or 15, 16, I was trying to find a way to make a difference. And just through my network of folks that I built out over time at Splunk and elsewhere, I had found a path into building a reputation within the special operations community. And then, they went off and brought me out and eventually offered me the position. I wasn't looking for the job. I didn't apply for it necessarily, but it's just one of those fortuitous matchmaking opportunities.
Yeah, there's so many like conversations within there. One is like you're looking for a path to get into public service and how problematic or challenging that can be for a technologist sometimes, other than enlisting like you talked about. And then also the fact that the Special Operations Command was increasingly realizing how dependent and reliant they were on technology in terms of modern day warfare, right? So they brought in a CTO, right? That's kind of speaks to where they see the technology and the importance of it in their activities and their operations. And then the last piece of just getting the opportunity to get in there and do something that has a mission that resonates with you and means a lot is amazing, man. So that's really cool to hear. I was watching something recently, and you guys, your company got listed on this list of Forbes top 25 venture-backed companies likely to reach a $1 billion valuation. How'd that feel when you saw that? Knowing all the blood, sweat, tears, years, and travel and hours that had took to build the company so far, and like, what do you think contributed to you guys landing on that list?
Yeah, I think there's two aspects. The first is the list is potential to be the next billion, so there's still a lot of work to do. But I got a text message from my dad, and if you hear me speak in various forums, I spent a lot of time talking about my dad and the influence that he had on me as an individual, as a career. So I got a text from my dad with the link to the article. And I had no idea that we had won. And I clicked on the article, I'm scrolling through. And of course, my first reaction is there's probably a bunch of joke companies on here. Who cares? I didn't pay to play for it. And I scroll down and there we are on the list. And it was this super cool, surreal feeling. I think for me, it's arrogantly cocky or whatever you want to describe it as. I expect it. I just expect, I expect to go undefeated in the football season and win the Super Bowl with a blowout. That's just what I expect because I know we have an amazing team, an amazing product, and amazing customers and partners. But I think the effect it had throughout the company was the real news story, because all of these folks that have put in their blood, sweat, and tears, whose families have watched their loved ones work 70, 80, 100 hours a week at Horizon 3 of the last 5 years, for them, it was bragging rights. And I saw this blow up on Facebook with, my co-founder's wife, for instance, was raving about this experience because for all of them, it was a sense of hey, we know we're going to do it, but now we've got Forbes, putting us on a list that further validates that we're on to something big.
Yeah, I'd imagine it's an amazing feeling, especially like you said, not just for you, but the team around you, everyone that supported them, and all the hard work and travel and commitment and sacrifice that went into that. Another thing I saw you had recently done was you spoke at this Black Hat Innovators and Investors Summit, and you talked about different things with different panelists, and some of the topics was what should founders look for in investors, and how VCs can also stand out in a highly competitive market. As someone who's navigated that now and is on the list from Forbes and things like that, what are some key lessons that you've learned and recommendations you make for early stage founders?
So I think the biggest takeaway for me while on that panel with some great folks, you had the former founder of Phantom, Oliver, you had Sid Trivedi over there and others, was something Sid Trivedi made, which was whether it's good news or bad news, if one of the first few phone calls you make is not your investor, there's something wrong. And that really stood out to me because he's spot on. Because you're always going to have rough waves when you're starting a company or running an early stage company. And so if things are going well, you want to celebrate. You want to call your board members. I've got text threads with each of my board members and investment teams. And good news, hey, here's where we're going. We just closed this big deal. Bad news is, hey, let's get on the phone. Something's come up. I need to talk you through it. And this goes back to that key the mic culture. Bad news doesn't get better with age. So the moment you find it, it's going to happen. That's why it's a startup. You talk through it early, you navigate the issues together, and you preserve as much decision space as you can. And there are two kind of counter characteristics in investors that I avoid as a result, when I run into it. The first one is An investor better be investing their time being as prepared about your company as you are. Because, if you're going to meet with them and you send a deck ahead of time, like a pitch deck, and they don't read the pitch deck before that first meeting, if they're not going to put in the 15 minutes it takes to read your pitch deck before you start talking to them, what makes you think they're going to put in the time, to prepare for a hard problem to talk through at a board meeting or at a pre-board meeting? Because usually you've solved all the easy problems and only hard problems are left that the board members need to do their homework for. I think the second thing I look for as a counter characteristic is investors or board members that freak out at the first rough wave. Startups are not easy. Startups, for founders in particular, are actually not fun. There's this Elon Musk quote: if you're a CEO and a founder, the problems you deal with are the hardest, crappiest problems in the company. And they're not fun. They're personnel issues or customer issues or whatever else that are not enjoyable. And the waves are always going to be rough and tumultuous. And if you got an investor that's going to run away or freak out at that first rough wave, they're only going to make life difficult for you. And so if you're not prepared and if you're not resilient, it's probably not going to be a good fit.
Yes, definitely a testament to the founder's journey. As you said, you're not often dealing with the shiny tech or the latest, feature and cool thing. It's the stuff that no one else necessarily wants to do, or the things that no one's excited about, that'll fall to you. You also talked recently about the importance of the team over the initial idea, and you used this analogy you called kind of pace setters and ankle weights within the team and how they're both important. Can you elaborate on what those terms mean, and how critical it is to building that foundational team to scaling the company?
Yeah. So first, about kind of early stage formation. So the idea for the most part doesn't matter. The idea is going to change. At first contact with a prospect, you're going to iterate on that idea. You're not going to necessarily pivot completely, but you're going to iterate, and those iterations compound into a very different end picture than from what you expected, say 12 months ago or 24 months ago. What matters in the early stage is the team. Do you have, even as founders, right? If you look at Tony and I come from an engineering background, but Tony is a hardcore, passionate engineer. His happy place is sitting there with other engineers working through and shipping code. My happy place, while I can do that, I'm also pretty good at talking to customers, dealing with marketing, all the other stuff. So we naturally complement each other from a background and expertise standpoint. And so when you look for a co-founder, what you look for is a person that's going to complement your skills, that's going to dig into the details. A catastrophic mistake I've seen early stage companies do is you have the CEO, founder, and then they immediately hire a COO, a CPO. Like, you have 5 C-level executives in a 5-person company. Well, you've burned all your budget and equity on a bunch of executives versus building from the bottom up. And that was a big lesson I learned in a past job. You want to recruit people in the early days that eat, live, breathe, sleep your domain and wish they could write code faster. Like, that is the ideal type of person. So if you look at the early team, Kanan Butch was a former special operations cyber person, significant experience on both sides of the cyber wall, and deep subject matter expertise in a bunch of critical areas, building out and maintaining cyber ranges, doing offensive cyber operations, understanding how to defend against it. Travis Falgren was another deep subject matter expertise in offensive and defensive cyber, coming from the military world. Naveen Sankovalli, who is an MIT grad, 20 years in industry, knows how to ship code in a professional way. He was in awe of the offensive expertise that Travis and Kanan had. Those guys were in awe of how quickly Naveen could ship code. And so what you look for early on are people passionate about your domain, because it's a big commitment. These are people that have very deep subject matter expertise that culturally get along. So we also made sure we hired people that weren't big ego. They weren't know-it-alls. They were learn-it-alls that could solve any problem as a team under pressure, which really captures, my experience of what I thought made the special operations world special too.
Yeah, it's funny. Literally, as you were saying that, before you said the closing line there, I thought about building highly operational, effective teams, and this goes well beyond software. You talked about the complementary skill sets, the expertise within the domain, the lack of ego, the ability to kind of disagree and commit on things, and follow one another's lead when appropriate, and so on. So you could tell you picked up some things in that community, I think, well beyond the software for sure. You also talked in one post you had up there about, 4 advantages iconic companies build over time. And, obviously you're looking to build an iconic company yourself here with Horizon 3. What were those advantages and how do they help you differentiate yourself from other companies?
Yeah. So first and foremost, and you kind of do it in this order, in my opinion, you have to think about how to create a data advantage on day one. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about the widget. I often describe Horizon 3, while our first product was autonomous pen testing, we're a data company. Pen testing is just a sensor. It's collecting a ton. We now collect, I think, roughly 1 billion unique attack events a month. That is proprietary training data nobody else has. And the analogy of it is to think about Tesla full self-driving. All the cameras that are on all those cars are collecting video, and that video is proprietary to Tesla, and it's a massive corpus of training data for them to build out the next generation of FSD algorithms. Similarly here, there was no offensive data set that was available. So we have to think about what is the data advantage that you're going to build over time, and how do you design for it on day one? The next thing I thought through was product advantage. And this is all about what aha moments are you trying to create for your end user. Godfrey Sullivan, who was the CEO of Splunk that brought me over to be CTO, used to say, your product experience should be so emotionally invigorating that a user needs a cigarette when they're done using your product. Like, that's how emotional it should be for them in a positive way. And so that product advantage is about understanding and designing aha moments for the end user. And those are the first 2 things in the early stage, like seed, A, B, you think about that. Right around the B stage, you start to think about a distribution advantage. How are you going to reach customers and prospects in a way that has economies of scale? You can't just sell product one steak dinner at a time. Like, those days are over. That's how you sold software in the 90s and early 2000s. It's about reach through a multiplier effect. Social is huge for cutting through a lot of the sales noise and drama. Channel partners, that last mile relationship, which was crucial during COVID, is another aspect of that distribution advantage. So around the B stage, you really start to think through how to create that distribution advantage for economies of scale. And then finally, what we're now embarking on is how to create that community advantage. How do we cultivate radical champions that are not necessarily even our customers? They are radical champions of the company, the product, and the brand that advocate when we're not in the room. And part of how you do that is you build in the open. Another part of how you do that is being technically authentic in each of the communities you're trying to talk to. You can't Jedi mind trick hand wave them with a bunch of marketing literature and think it's going to work. And this is actually Tony's superpower. And we just brought a guy, Phil Wiley, on. But their superpowers are that they are technically authentic in those settings. And you get pumped, man. You want to run through a wall after you hear Tony talk about his passion of the product and the category and the capability. And so how do you build that community advantage at scale? I think if you hit all 4 of those, product, data, distribution, and community, you've built an iconic company.
Yeah, a few things you said there really jumped out to me. The first part was the data piece. You guys are big on the catchphrase, kind of offense informed defense. When you think about all those data points of offensive malicious activity and being able to enable your customers with those, it really, speaks to helping them build a robust, resilient architecture, system, environment, et cetera, to mitigate those kind of threats. And then, the distribution piece, of course, I forget the exact amount, but it's a large amount of dollars that go through the channel partner ecosystem rather than direct sales. So it speaks to the maturity of your sales team and what you're building. And then the last piece, Philip and the team that you're talking about there, I know him. I followed his content for a long time now too. And those people are going to go out and they're going to engage with the community, and they've built a name for themselves. So they have, credibility and trust among the community. So when they speak and they're associating with you, people are going to by nature kind of trust what you guys are up to, because they see it's not, this isn't just some marketing sales stick. This is someone who's in the community, who has credibility, who has trust, and that's going to resonate very well, in my opinion. So all great moves you guys are making over there for sure. So yeah, you also talked about this in the beginning, obviously your JSOC experience, but you also have that deep commercial background too. I'm curious, many folks don't really get the experience to have both domains of public and private sector. How has that shaped you, having the experience in that highly regulated, sometimes slow moving, a complex, cumbersome, regulated environment of the government, but also JSOC was a unique nature of its own, but, coupled with the commercial ecosystem where it's move fast, break things, things like that. How's that shaped you in the way you approach, building the team out?
Yeah, I think before that is how has it shaped me personally as a founder now? And when I think about my career, I think about early Lego blocks that I focused on building. So the first Lego block was technical credibility and expertise. This is something I focused on in the early career at IBM. I was a middleware WebSphere software developer. Middleware was an interesting space to start in my career because you have to understand hardware and virtualization and scale. You've got to understand application layer and above. You've got to understand distributed systems and all the kind of performance ramifications that come with distributed systems. So it was actually an incredible technical expertise to build out within IBM that was transferable to the cloud era, to the AI era, and beyond. But the next thing I realized is I was very mediocre at speaking, and I was very mediocre at writing. And I had to be able to communicate complex technical details to the masses. And so I invested and put myself out there, and I started to force myself to teach internal IBM classes. I started to write more, writing technical papers and so on. And the first versions of these made people think I was illiterate. And, I guess public school in New Hampshire will do that to you. But like, I had to learn how to become a better communicator. I forced myself to overcome some of my challenges and become a better speaker. And then it was about, do I know how to launch product? And I took a lateral move, took a pay cut, worked as a product manager. I was a really crappy product manager at the very beginning, forced myself to learn and got better at it. I'd never managed. And when I became a CIO, I was suddenly managing 200 plus people. My first, the first CIO job I had to learn how to do that. And so I think, when you think about these Lego blocks of technical credibility, how to launch a product, how to manage organizations. At Splunk, it was about how to scale go-to-market. I got to study under Dave Conti, who's now the CFO at Databricks, and Susan St. Ledger and others that were just super gifted at scaling business operations. So every job at JSOC, it was about a PhD program in leadership. That's the way I viewed that job. It was a 99% pay cut. My wife still reminds me of it on a regular basis. But it was a PhD program in leadership. I got to learn and grew in so many unique ways. So for those out there, when you think about your career, the early job leaps, you're going to get an extra 10% raise or 20% raise if you go to that other job. After taxes, in the early part of your career, that's maybe a slightly nicer car and a few extra nice dinners a month. It's not material enough to change your lifestyle. And with that attitude, the early jobs I took focused on where I was going to learn the most. And that compounded into being a pretty decently prepared first-time CEO as I've gone through it this time.
Yeah, it's really critical that you brought up the soft skill part of it, because it's ironic you focus on the technical competency early in your career, and you talked about being you talked about being illiterate in the presentations and building those communication skills. And funny enough, here you are now in the role where your co-founder likes to focus on the tech, and you're kind of out there doing a lot of the engagement, the speaking, the customer intimacy and things like that, the industry involvement. So it's come full circle in that regard. And I definitely think, again, like you talked about the JSOC experience, the leadership PhD is when the stakes are high in that community. It takes key leadership skills and capabilities to really operate in an environment like that. So again, it contributed well to where you are now. And you guys, like I said, you're big on that mantra of offense and informed defense. Why do you think that's critical, and why do you think we miss the value of that approach in cyber? We often are very reactionary by nature, for example. Like, why do we not take that approach more often?
Yeah, so it's actually, when we were first founding the company, Naveen, one of our founding engineers, pointed something out that we all kind of knew, but no one had really said it in the open, at least with me, which was, he goes, look, at the company he was working at the time, I think it was RSA, it's like, I'm surrounded by people that are building defensive products that have no clue how offense works. Like, they're not even sure what they're defending against because they don't actually understand how to attack. And so he decided, as a software engineer and architect, to go off and get his OSCP certification for the sole purpose of knowing or having a slightly better understanding of the offensive side of the house. And he said he was able to become a much better software engineer of defensive products because he had a better understanding of the attack side. And I think that's true across the board. I think that, you always talk about looking at your environment through the eyes of the adversary, whether I watched teams plan missions within the special operations world, they were always red teaming themselves of turning the map around and looking at their plans from the eyes of the adversary. And it made them better at executing their mission. And so as Naveen and I talked about this, and as I kind of made that connection of turning the map around, and there was a great paper by Nathaniel Fick, who's now the ambassador for cyber at the State Department, on this topic of turning the map around, it really clicked that we needed to, in order to improve defense, we had to better understand the attack. And that would allow us to focus on the problems that truly mattered. And that's something we can dive into a lot more detail, but that was kind of the crux of the early thesis.
Yeah, I think it's critical as like you said, we're kind of building products often. We don't understand how the attackers operate, and obviously people are leaning into like things like MITRE ATT&CK and things like that. But truly flipping it around and learning those skill sets you talked about, it speaks again to the team that you've built. Like that individual went out there, got the OSCP certification, dug into the technical skills required to understand those methodologies, and not just in theory but in practice too. So when you look at the last piece here. The last question I had for you here is, when you poke some fun at how organizations are operating, we look at things like running vulnerability scans, doing annual pen tests, having a kind of a false sense of security. I saw your team joking about this a little bit in the post. How is Horizon 3 disrupting the traditional pen test space and leading to like more secure organizational outcomes?
Yeah, so let's actually kind of fast forward to something that's fairly obtuse, which is the deception market. I'm actually fairly bearish on deception companies. And the reason why I'm bearish on deception companies is twofold. One, for the most part, when I started looking at an employee and applying deception in previous jobs, we were randomly throwing darts at various servers and file shares and so on, hoping that an attacker would get there. And okay, that's cool. But even then, we could barely handle the basics as a defensive team. What makes you think I've got the time to spin up a fake environment when my real environment is also not very secure? And so a good example of offense informs defense is what we just launched with Node Zero Tripwires, which is while running a pen test, we're able to automatically install honey tokens, so fake AWS credentials, fake Azure credentials, fake sensitive command files, and so on the hosts and file shares we successfully compromised. So the pen test is giving you this map and compass for all of the things that we were successfully able to attack and compromise and gain access. Most likely, those are the same things that an attacker is going to be able to get to because we did it and we didn't simulate it. We actually exploited you, and here's the path proof and the impact. Now we're able to install an early warning network based on those pen test results. And so the way I see the world evolving is the pen test results are a compass and map that allow you to precisely deploy honey tokens. You could arguably precisely deploy EDR agents only on the hosts and file shares and databases and so on that are highly susceptible to an attack versus spreading the peanut butter thin everywhere. Not that I'm advocating for it, but you get the idea of using attack at scale and the results of it to help optimize every calorie you're spending on the defensive side.
Yeah, I think it's critical, this attack path capability. I saw it come out and I was really excited because you guys kind of have talked about this, but typically you'll see a pen test, people get the results and then you kind of revisit it in a year and you're not really paying attention between that time of, what's actually happening in the environment. Has someone done something? And if they have, we often find out after the fact rather than, during the attack when we can go in there and limit the blast radius, implement mitigations, maybe implement some, segmentation or things that can really, limit the compromise and the impact of the compromise. So really innovative capability. Definitely check it out on Horizon 3 AI's website here, Attack Pass. I put it in the comment. But Snehal, thanks so much, man, for joining me. We've ran the gamut of talks from, kind of growing, scaling the company, the team, key advice for founders and venture capitalists, to what you guys are up to in the disrupting of the pen test space. So thanks so much for taking the time to come chat today. And thanks to everyone who tuned in.
Awesome, Chris. Thanks for the invite. And I'm also a fanboy, so I get to watch all your content come out there, and looking forward to doing this in person next time.
Sounds good, man. Take care.